The day my father introduced me to his new family, he smiled more at them in 10 minutes than he had smiled at me in the past year. He didn't say I'd been replaced. He didn't have to, because the way he looked at his new wife, the way he put his hand on her son's shoulder, the way he forgot to ask me a single real question that night, told me everything. Suddenly, I wasn't his future anymore. I was just a reminder of the life he was trying to erase. So he gave them everything: the house, the holidays, the business, and expected me to disappear quietly. For a while, I did. But what he didn't understand was something simple. You can replace a son in your family photo, but you can't replace the person who built your company from the inside. And 10 years later, I took all of it back. The day my father introduced me to his new family, he smiled more at them in 10 minutes than he had smiled at me in the past year. He didn't say I'd been replaced. He didn't have to, because the way he looked at his new wife, the way he put his hand on her son's shoulder, the way he forgot to ask me a single real question that night, told me everything. Suddenly, I wasn't his future anymore. I was just a reminder of the life he was trying to erase. So he gave them everything: the house, the holidays, the business, and expected me to disappear quietly. For a while, I did. But what he didn't understand was something simple. You can replace a son in your family photo, but you can't replace the person who built your company from the inside. And 10 years later, I took all of it back. That's the part people never understand when I tell them this story. My father didn't disappear in one dramatic moment. He didn't wake up one morning, pack his bags, and become a villain. It happened slowly, in increments, in rescheduled weekends, in shorter phone calls, in birthdays where he arrived late and left early, in all the tiny ways a parent teaches you that you're becoming optional. My parents divorced when I was 16. The official reason was irreconcilable differences, which is the kind of phrase adults use when the truth is too embarrassing or too boring to explain. In reality, my mother was tired of being married to a man who treated emotional presence like a bonus feature. And my father was tired of being reminded that family required consistency he didn't naturally possess. At first, after the divorce, he made the right noises. I'll still be there. This changes nothing. You're still my son. That last one always stood out to me. Not because it was comforting, because people only reassure you of obvious things when they're already preparing to make them less obvious later. For about a year, he tried. Weekend lunches, calls every few days, awkward attempts at father-son conversations that felt more like performance than instinct. But then he met Linda, and that was the beginning of the edit. Linda was the kind of woman who made people use words like graceful when what they really meant was socially efficient. She knew how to host, how to smile at the exact right moment, how to make every dinner feel curated. She had 2 children from her previous marriage: Michael, who was 19 when I first met him, and Sophie, who was 15 and already skilled in the kind of passive cruelty that gets mistaken for charm in well-dressed girls. Together, they look like the family my father always wanted people to think he had. Polished, photogenic, easier. No history of arguments, no old disappointments, no visible wreckage from the marriage he had just left behind. The first time he invited me over to Linda's house, I knew something had shifted before I even got out of the car. There were fresh flowers by the entrance, soft music inside, a dining table set like an advertisement for second chances. My father opened the door smiling in a way I hadn't seen since before the divorce, not because he was happy to see me, because he was happy to be seen. Linda kissed his cheek while introducing me to her children, and the whole thing felt less like a family meeting and more like a casting decision. He wanted us to fit together quickly, smoothly, without resistance. What he didn't understand was that some things resist not because they are broken, but because they are real. The four of them moved around that house like they had already rehearsed belonging. Linda poured wine. Sophie made a joke about school that my father laughed at too hard. Michael spoke confidently about business ideas and future plans, in the vague, expensive way boys do when they've never had to survive their own incompetence. And my father loved him instantly. That was obvious. Not because Michael was especially impressive, because he was easy. He agreed with my father, nodded at the right moments, called him sir exactly once, which my father pretended to dislike, but visibly enjoyed. Meanwhile, I sat at the table feeling like a guest at the launch party for my own replacement. At one point, Linda asked me, "So, what are you interested in these days?" I started telling her about operation systems and logistics modeling, things I had begun studying because I found them interesting, because I liked understanding how things moved and where they broke. Before I got more than 2 sentences in, my father interrupted. "He's always liked that back-end stuff." Back-end stuff. That was how he dismissed it. Not discipline, not systems thinking, not the foundation of almost every company he had ever admired. Just back-end stuff. Then he turned to Michael and said, "Tell him about the hospitality concept you were talking about." And just like that, my conversation was over. Michael launched into some half-formed idea about premium travel experiences for high-net-worth families, which sounded suspiciously like something he'd heard on a podcast and mistaken for a personality. My father leaned in, asked questions, engaged, approved. I remember sitting there very still, looking at his face while he listened to Michael, and understanding something that would take me years to admit clearly. He didn't love the idea. He loved the fantasy of a son he could build without guilt attached. After that dinner, I started noticing it everywhere. My old room at his place, because yes, for a while after the divorce I still had one, began changing. First it became a guest room, then a mixed-use room, then Michael's workspace when he needed somewhere to set up his laptop and pretend to be busy. No one announced these changes. That's how displacement usually works in families. Not through declarations, through gradual practicalities. A box moved here, a drawer reassigned there. A phrase like, "You don't really use this anymore, do you?" By the time you realize your place has been taken, everyone else is already calling it reasonable. The holidays shifted too. Christmas Eve at Linda's, Easter brunch at Linda's parents' house. Birthdays arranged around Sophie's debate competitions and Michael's increasingly absurd startup pitches. I was still invited sometimes, but invitation and inclusion are not the same thing. I was present, occasionally. They were central, always. And the more central they became, the more my father needed me to be low maintenance, gracious, adaptable, not difficult. Because difficult children complicate reinvention. The first real sign that this was going to become something bigger than emotional neglect came when I turned 18. My father owned a mid-sized logistics company, nothing glamorous from the outside, but strong, profitable, the kind of business built over decades, with old relationships, messy systems, reliable contracts, and enough hidden fragility that only someone inside it would understand how much daily discipline it required. I had been spending weekends there since I was 15, at first just helping around the warehouse, later sitting with dispatch teams, asking questions, watching how client relationships were managed, how delayed shipments became lawsuits if handled badly, how one mistake in routing could poison 3 contracts at once. I loved it, not because the business was beautiful, because it was real. Everything mattered, everything connected. If you fixed one process, 5 other problems got easier. If you ignored one weak point, the whole thing bled quietly for months. It made sense to me in a way family never had. When I graduated high school, I assumed I would continue learning there. Not as entitlement, as work. My father never promised me ownership. But he did say, more than once, if you want to understand business, start where things actually move. I believed him. Then one afternoon, he called me into his office and said something casually that changed the trajectory of my life. I'm bringing Michael into the company this summer. I frowned. In what role? He leaned back in his chair. Management training. I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. Michael had never worked a real day in that business. Didn't know the warehouse teams. Didn't understand routing. Could barely arrive on time to lunch. But my father wasn't joking, and the way he looked at me when I laughed told me something worse. He expected me to make room. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. There was room for both of us, right? Michael could learn the polished side. I could keep learning the actual business. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just another family adjustment that felt personal because everything with my father now felt personal. But then Michael arrived, and within weeks, the pattern was obvious. He was introduced to clients before he learned the company's basic systems, given a title before he had earned trust, included in strategic dinners where he contributed nothing. My father called it confidence building. The warehouse teams called it something else when he wasn't around, mostly profanity. Still, I stayed. Because despite everything, I still believed work would reveal the truth. I believed if I became indispensable enough, reality would eventually override preference. That's the naive faith of hardworking sons. We think competence is corrective. Sometimes it is. Sometimes people would rather let the building burn than admit they trusted the wrong child. I thought my father was just favoring his new stepson. I didn't realize he was doing something much bigger. Because by the time I was 25, I wasn't just working in the company. I was quietly running most of it. And the man my father planned to hand it to had no idea how anything actually worked. By the time I was 25, my father believed Michael was learning how to run the company. But inside the business, everyone knew the truth. Michael didn't run anything. He observed, talked, suggested ideas he didn't understand, then disappeared when real problems showed up. And problems showed up every day. Delayed shipments, driver shortages, clients threatening to cancel contracts, payment disputes, operational breakdowns that could cost tens of thousands of dollars in hours. That's where I existed, not in meetings, not in presentations, in the places where things broke and needed to be fixed immediately. Over the years, I had built something my father didn't even realize existed. Not a product, not a department, a system. I knew which clients needed constant reassurance, which drivers could handle pressure, which routes were risky during certain months, which employees were reliable, and which ones would quietly create problems if left unsupervised. None of that was written down. It lived in experience, and experience isn't something you can transfer in a meeting. One afternoon, a major client called in a panic. A shipment worth nearly $500,000 had gone missing in transit. The situation was critical. If we lost that client, we'd lose 3 more connected contracts. My father wasn't in the office. Michael froze. He didn't even know who to call. So I stepped in, tracked the route, identified the delay point, contacted the driver, rerouted the shipment, resolved the issue within hours. The client stayed. The contract stayed. And when my father returned, Michael told him, "We handled it." We. My father nodded proudly. That's leadership. I didn't correct him. Because by then, I understood something important. Recognition didn't change reality. Control did. A few months later, my father made it official. Michael was promoted to operations manager. The title alone was absurd. He didn't understand operations. He barely understood the company. But titles aren't given for competence in families like mine. They're given for narrative. My father needed a story where his new family represented the future. And Michael fit that story perfectly. At first, the employees tried to adapt. They respected my father. They tolerated Michael. But respect has limits, and incompetence exposes itself quickly. Michael started making decisions without understanding consequences, changing delivery schedules, switching vendors, altering pricing structures to increase margins, without realizing he was damaging long-term contracts. Within weeks, small problems began appearing: missed deadlines, confused teams, unhappy clients. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to feel the shift. Then Linda got involved, not directly in operations, but in something more dangerous: strategy. She started attending dinners with my father and key clients, hosting events, building relationships, positioning Michael as the future face of the company. She was good at it, very good. Because unlike Michael, she understood people. She knew how to shape perception. And perception, in business, is often more powerful than truth. I went to his office immediately. "Is this a joke?" He looked up calmly. "No. You just removed me from operations. You're still part of the company." "That's not what I asked." He sighed. "This is about long-term structure." "For who?" "For the future." That word again. Future. The same future that apparently didn't include me anymore. I went to his office immediately. "Is this a joke?" He looked up calmly. "No. You just removed me from operations. You're still part of the company." "That's not what I asked." He sighed. "This is about long-term structure." "For who?" "For the future." That word again. Future. The same future that apparently didn't include me anymore. My father didn't say it directly, but I understood. I wasn't being replaced because I failed. I was being replaced because I didn't fit the image he wanted. I wasn't part of his new life. Michael was. And in his mind, that mattered more than competence. After that conversation, everything changed. Employees stopped coming to me first, not because they trusted Michael, because they were told to. Decisions slowed down, mistakes increased, and for the first time in years, I stepped back. Not completely, just enough. Enough to let the system run without me holding it together. That's when I realized something important. The company wasn't going to collapse overnight. It was going to bleed. Slowly, quietly, and the only person who knew exactly where it would break was me. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't fight for my position. I didn't try to prove my value. Because for the first time, I saw the full picture. My father wasn't choosing competence. He was choosing his new family. And that choice had consequences. Not immediately, but inevitably. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't fight for my position. I didn't try to prove my value. Because for the first time, I saw the full picture. My father wasn't choosing competence. He was choosing his new family, and that choice had consequences. Not immediately, but inevitably. There wasn't a dramatic resignation, no shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet decision. I stopped fixing problems that weren't mine anymore. For years, every time something went wrong, I stepped in automatically. It had become instinct, like muscle memory. But after my father made Michael the center of operations, that instinct became a liability. Because every time I fixed something, I protected a system that was pushing me out. So I stopped. Not all at once, just enough. Enough to let reality surface. At first, nothing looked different from the outside. The truck still moved. The warehouse still operated. Clients still called. But inside the system, the cracks started widening. A delayed shipment here. A misrouted delivery there. A client waiting longer than usual for answers. Small things. The kind of problems I used to catch before they became visible. Now they slipped through. And Michael didn't see them. Because he didn't know where to look. What Michael and my father never understood was this. The company didn't run on systems. It ran on decisions. Thousands of small decisions made every day by someone who understood how everything connected. When I stepped back, those decisions disappeared. And without them, the system began collapsing quietly. What Michael and my father never understood was this. The company didn't run on systems. It ran on decisions. Thousands of small decisions made every day by someone who understood how everything connected. When I stepped back, those decisions disappeared. And without them, the system began collapsing quietly. Instead of questioning Michael's competence, Linda proposed something else. Maybe the company needs modernization. New consultants were hired, expensive ones. They came in with presentations, charts, strategies, recommendations, all designed to make the company look more efficient. But consultants don't fix broken foundations. They rearrange visible parts. And sometimes, that makes the damage worse. Within months, the company started losing money. Not dramatically, but consistently. Margins dropped. Costs increased. Clients became less loyal. The consultants blamed market conditions. Linda blamed temporary instability. Michael blamed staff inefficiency. My father blamed everything except the actual problem. 6 months after the restructuring, my father called me into his office again. This time, his tone was softer. "We need to finalize your position." I already knew what that meant. "You're letting me go?" He hesitated. "It's just, the company is moving in a different direction." Different direction. That was his way of saying I didn't belong anymore. I nodded. Okay. No argument. No resistance. Because I had already made my decision months earlier. While the company was restructuring, I had been doing something quietly, building my own logistics company, not from scratch, from knowledge, from experience, from understanding exactly how the old company worked and where it was vulnerable. I started small, a few clients, a few contracts, but I focused on something my father's company had started losing: reliability, consistency, trust. The first major client didn't come to me because I advertised. They came because they were frustrated, missed deadlines, poor communication, unresolved issues. They didn't want innovation, they wanted stability, and I gave it to them. That was the beginning. Over the next year, more clients started leaving my father's company, not all at once, gradually, quietly, the same way the company had started collapsing. One contract, then another, then another. And each time, they came to me. because I understood exactly what they needed. One afternoon, I received a call from a client my father considered untouchable, a contract worth millions. They didn't ask for a presentation, they didn't negotiate aggressively. They asked one simple question: "Can you guarantee delivery reliability?" I answered honestly, "Yes." That was enough.